All right, so our speaker today, I'm really excited about this, Tony Loyd, because I got these notes, and it was April 29th of 2025. Less than a year ago, Tony was diagnosed with lung cancer, and as a non-smoking endurance athlete, the news, of course, was devastating. Tony knew he had to dig in and find his personal endurance, and as a former Fortune 500 executive, he did what he's always done. He turned to the experts, and together with his partner, Jen, who's here today, he scoured research to discover what it really takes to endure. Last September, 25% of his lungs were removed, last September. And today, he's on a journey to find out what it takes to get 100% from the 75% of his lungs that remain. Today, Tony will share stories and insights from his journey connecting endurance to Rotary's values of service and leadership. Hopefully, you'll be inspired to see endurance in a new light, understand how it works, and walk away with practical ideas you can apply to your lives, your workplace, and to our Rotary Club. With that, welcome Tony. Where'd Tony go? There he is.
So, question for you. Does the world ever feel unstable?
Yes.
No? Does it ever feel like things are shifting very quickly, like you're standing on a rock but the rock starts rolling? Ever feel that way? You know, it's interesting because you reacted very strongly to that. A lot of times I ask the question, say, does the world ever feel unstable? And it's so kind of like obscure, right? It's a big question. Sorry, thank you, Ben. Ben's reminding me I'm supposed to be using my microphone. Thank you, Ben. So let me just ask you in a couple of categories here. Economic volatility and inflation. You ever feel that? Has anyone filled their car up with gas lately? Yeah. Has anyone looked at their 401k lately? Right? Technology and AI, is that disrupting or changing your world in any way? Yeah. Right. Somebody's writing a book on that, right? I mean, book number 7. You know, there's a factory in China that cranks out 300,000 cars per year with no employees. It's just all robots and AI running the factory. They even contract out the people who come in to service the machines. There's another factory that, and by the way, they don't even have the lights on in the factory because there's no humans in there, right? And they'll turn on the lights, the maintenance crew will come through and they'll turn off the lights and it'll keep cranking out cars. There's another factory that is exactly the same. Those are called lights out factories. That factory, you know what they make? Robot arms that make things in other factories, right? So it's really shifting our world very quickly. Regulatory and policy uncertainty, right? Are tariffs on today? Are they off? We don't know, and then that disrupts our supply chains, right? So in business, we're seeing this quite a bit. People are feeling the instability too, though, on a personal level. And so somebody the other day, I'm doing this exercise where I'm having 100 cups of coffee with different business leaders, not 100 at once, but I may talk a little faster if I had 100 cups of coffee. But somebody called this the other day, they called it the constant churn of chaotic change. And I thought, man, I'm going to trademark that. That is such a good phrase. But do you ever feel that? Like the world is shifting so fast. Some of the things I've been hearing in these cups of coffee, one woman said, the uncertainty is eroding our confidence and slowing execution. And I said, well, that sounds like something you would say to a shareholder call, right? That was very polished the way you said it. But if I was standing in the hallways and I was listening to your employees, what would they be saying? And she said, we're pivoting. Hold that. We need to rethink that. That the priorities we gave them on Monday don't work on Wednesday. That's how fast things are changing. And one of her managers said to her, I don't know what's true today. Like something that was true in our company on Monday may not be true on Wednesday. And then she said, we're simultaneously rolling out AI, automations, and we're upgrading our systems at the same time. And I said, it sounds to me like you're between a rock and a hard place. And she said, no, I'm not between a rock and a hard place. That doesn't describe it. I'm in a rock tumbler. You ever see a rock tumbler? You ever see what that looks like? You know, it's like rocks are slamming into each other. There's constant friction, constant pressure, no place to rest, right? Just the rocks tumbling around, bam, 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 bam. And sometimes it feels like that. And that experience, what we're starting to emerge, a phrase that we're using more and more, we're calling it leadership strain. Like leaders of civic organizations, of city organizations, of industry, they're feeling the strain of this constant change. And so I want to talk for a second about the force that you may not be, like it doesn't come to the front of your mind. You know it, but you don't think about it. So let me just kind of bring it back to the front of your mind for a second. If we plot time on the x-axis and we plot change on the y-axis, let me get out of the way over here, what you're going to find is we could map out the rate of change. How fast is everything changing? And if you go back to, the agrarian society, 10,000 BC, over time things didn't change much, right? The Huns would come over the hill and take over, and then the Huns would go back over the hill, but you were still farming. There were seasons, and some years there were droughts, some years there was too much rain, there was a fire one year, but basically your life remained the same. And even in the 1400s, when the printing press came into existence, only the propertied, people with property, only those folks read for the most part, and so it didn't change the life for most people. And then around 1800s, the Industrial Revolution came in, and what starts happening is you've got machines that can move the earth, and you've got factories that are belching out black smoke into the atmosphere, and you've got machines that can move people from one side of the country to the other, and it can move freight, and so things started to change a little bit. The rate of change started to tick up. And then something happened right about here that shot the rate of change straight up. And I would put that date around 1947 when they invented the transistor. Like it used to be that electronics were these giant machines, right, filled with tubes, and all of a sudden we could begin to shrink those things, and we have a rapid rate of change starts with the transistor. So right after that, you get the speakerphone. AI got to start at Dartmouth in 1956. We called it machine learning back then. Right after that, integrated circuits, computer touchscreens, microprocessors, personal computers, cell phones. And in 2007, Steve Jobs and the Apple crew, they took all these things and they stuck them together. And today, you have an AI-driven supercomputer in your pocket. And we all have access to so much processing power. And what happens is that accelerating rate of change, you kind of feel like you're strapped on the outside of a rocket, headed straight for the moon, and you're just shaking, right? I mean, the world starts to feel unstable. When I ask you, does it feel unstable? You laughed because, that feeling well. So you're not imagining it. The data bears this out. If you look at this Accenture's Pulse of Change Index, they do this every year, and 3 statistics I'll pull out of there. The rate of change, so the rate of change, how much change is accelerating, affecting business has risen 183% in the past 5 years, 33% the last year alone. And worse than that, 82% of C-suite leaders expect a higher rate of change this year compared to last year. And 86% are going to continue to invest in AI even if the market pulls back. Even if their customers spend less money, they're going to continue to invest. And so this rate of change is going to keep going straight up. So what's happening is we've got this accelerating rate of change, which means you feel constant disruption. The things we were talking about right at the beginning of this, market forces, everything's like the disruptors are getting disrupted now. And so the world starts to feel unstable. And this is where that constant churn of chaotic change comes in. That's where it starts to feel that way. And so what happens is leaders wear down, fatigue sets in, and that's where that leadership strain comes in. Fatigue becomes exhaustion, and leaders burn out. And the cost of replacing a leader in an organization, when I worked in the corporate world, we used to say you take your annual salary and you multiply it times 1.5, and that's how much it takes to replace a person you've lost because of burnout. And so we've been thinking about this, about how do you break that cycle? How do you interrupt that? And so the word that we're using right now is this word endurance. And we'll talk about how we got there, but I haven't really even introduced myself, so let me do that. So my name is Tony Loyd. I spell my last name with one L. It's a weird name, I know. I always say the people with money get 2 L's, we only got 1. That's what happened. You see Lloyds of London, they got lots of L's in their name, not us, right? So I was a Fortune 500 executive. I worked with John Deere for a lot of years, Medtronic, Buffalo Wild Wings. As was introduced a while ago, I'm also an endurance athlete. That's me running in Sydney this last August. And I've interviewed hundreds of startup founders. I have this podcast called Social Entrepreneur. I haven't produced an episode since May of 2022, and it's still in the top 1% of all podcast downloads in the world. And so people are very interested in this topic, and social entrepreneurs are people who use business to do social good. That's what they are. And so I interviewed lots of them, and talk about chaos and churn and all that right at the beginning of a startup. It's just madness in an organization. You can ask Jen right now. We're starting up a company, and she's like, right? And we wrote a book called Crazy Good Advice a few years ago, and it was a best-selling book. But I was on this path, I called it fade to black, right? I was doing all that stuff, but honestly, I'm kind of tired, like I don't want to keep doing this all the time. So I was starting to back away from a lot of that. Like I said, I shut down the podcast. I was doing less things. I'm on a couple of boards for nonprofits. I'm disentangling myself from that. So I was kind of on this, I'm just going to step back a little bit and step out of the scene. And then a funny thing happened on the way to retirement, as it often does. And so that day that changed everything, April 29th, 2025, so I was in my apartment, and I'm surrounded by boxes, and the reason I'm in my apartment surrounded by boxes is I'm moving. And the reason I'm moving is because I'm getting a divorce. And some people, they get a divorce and they go, woo, I got rid of the bum, right? It wasn't like that for us, right? I felt haunted and horrible, and it was the worst day of my life. And I'm standing here in this apartment surrounded by boxes, and I get a little ding on my phone, and I look at it, and it says, you have a message on my chart. And my chart comes from your doctors, right? So I open up the message, and the first words I see are pulmonary malignancy. I have lung cancer. That's a bad day. That's a tough day. But one of the things I've learned is when you are up against something difficult, the best way to get past it is to get curious. And so a question popped in my head, and that question is, how do you endure when the bottom drops out? How do you endure when the bottom drops out? So I set out to answer that question. Now, I thought, what do I have in my hand? And one thing I had in my hands is I have this company called Culture Shift Advisors. And so, I've still got this company, though I'm folding it, I'm sort of fading away. I could revive this, and we could go to work and figure this thing out. So I partnered with Jen Wiseman, who's here. Say hi, Jen. Hi, Jen. There. Yeah, so Jen is a psychotherapist. She's a clinical social worker. She's a public author. She's so smart. I mean, she's got more letters after her name than I have in my name, right? So Jen understands from a very rudimentary level a lot of the principles that we're talking about. If I woke her up in the middle of the night and asked her, pro-social behavior, what is that? She could tell you the definition, right? So she understands this world we're getting into. So the first thing we had to do, though, was to define when we say endurance, what does that mean? When we say endurance, what does that mean? And so endurance is being unshakable in a world that feels unstable. That's the goal. And when I asked you earlier, does the world ever feel unstable? I heard oh yeah, right? So that's our goal right here. Endurance is being unshakable in a world that feels unstable. So how do you do that? And so we've been looking at the research. We've been saying, what does the research tell us about people who endure, about businesses that endure? And before I go on, let me just acknowledge something. I'm not here to teach Rotary Club how to endure, right? That would be silly of me, because Rotary Club's been enduring for a long time. I've talked to a couple of Rotarians in here who have endured for a long time, right? 30 years, 40 years with Rotary Club. And so we're going to talk about what we're finding in the research, but I will say that Rotary Club and Rotarians in general are very good at this. But why is that? If you stop and think about it, why is that? So we have this model, and the model is called endurance leadership, and I'm not going to ask you to read all that. We'll go over that in a second. But it sort of frames up, we found that there are these 5 key areas that cause people to endure over time. And we'll go over those. But, you know, here's the thing. If I were your typical business person, what I would do now is I would have a slide up here, and the slide would have some pillars, and it would have these, it looked like the Colosseum, right? And there'd be these 5 pillars, and on the pillars are the names of these 5 things. Well, I'm not your typical business person. I'm not going to do that kind of stuff. So we call these aid stations. And let me explain what that means. So an aid station, when you're doing an ultra marathon or you're doing a long trail race, you're running for 50 miles, 100 miles, 150 miles. And so along the way, they have these aid stations, these places you can stop. And so, like, there's food there, and there's water to refill your water backpack, and there's tape for your sore feet, and there's, if you've got a rub on the side where the your backpack's been rubbing, they get a little Vaseline, you can sort of rub it on there. So it's a place to find relief in the middle of the chaos. And so we call these aid stations, and we named them after these aid stations in endurance events. So here they are. We'll take them one at a time very quickly. So the first is calm. And these are all verbs, right? So calm is a state of being, but how do you calm yourself when the crisis comes? How do you get yourself centered and balanced? And so the definition is how leaders regulate stress, model composure, and create stability under pressure. So we're talking about ways that you can calm yourself, and then clarify. How do you clarify your values? If you know your why, you can do any how. And Rotarians are really good at this, that you understand the value that you're bringing. You understand the service that you're doing, right? So if you know your why, you can do any how. Clarify. Change is being adaptable and changing. Now, I've talked to Rotarians who have told me when they joined Rotary way back when, you had to be invited. You couldn't just stumble into a Rotary Club. Somebody had to find you and go, hey, listen, I'm in this organization. It's called Rotary, and you should be a member, right? But the other thing was women were not allowed. The original Rotary Club, it was a men's club. And so Rotary has had to pivot and change, and in order to endure, they've been really good at this. Connect. Well, that's what you're here for today, right? You're here to connect and have fellowship and to be part of a community. And then continue. So how do you build the habits that cause you to endure over time? So that's what those are. Now, one thing that we have found is, as we're looking at these, if we help a leader, whether they're in a civic organization, in a business, if they're part of a city, if they're whatever they're in, if you help them to endure, but the organization doesn't support that, it doesn't work. And so we have to look at the other side, because it's not our goal to prepare good people to tolerate toxic work environments. That's not the goal here. The word endure is about tolerance. How do you tolerate something? And as endurance athletes, we'll go out and we'll run. Like last weekend, we ran 12 miles. This coming weekend, I'll do 14 miles. I'm building my way up to a marathon. And so every week, I'm learning to tolerate a little bit more. But it's not the goal to tolerate toxic things within the work environment. So we have to work on the system. So it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick system. That's a quote we found from Jiddu Krishnamurti. And so we have a model that works on the other side of this. So the enduring enterprise, how do enterprises endure? And we found the 5 aid stations work, but you have to make some adjustments for the enterprise. And so it works. Endurance leadership works on the individual level, on the leadership level, and it works on the organizational level. And what we have available right now free, these are self-assessments and some micro practices that you can apply today. So a micro practice is something in the next 24 hours you could do it, and it's a small win that you can move forward with. If you are interested in the self-assessment, you can go to cultureshift.com. It's free of charge. Or you can go to cultureshift.com/assessment. There's 10 questions. Takes you there's 5 focus areas. Takes you 3 minutes to do it. And there's longer versions of the assessment if you're interested after that. Okay? I see people getting their cameras out and taking pictures. That's good. All right, keep the cameras ready. Here we go. So at the end of that, you can when you finish your self-assessment, there's 2 choices then. You can download the micro practices right then, or you can go on and take the longer version of this self-assessment, which is also free. And the micro practices, again, these are things that you could put into practice in the next 24 hours. If you don't want to take the self-assessment, you can still get the micro practices. They're at tonyloyd.com. Again, the guy with a weird last name with only one L, tonyloyd.com, and the micro practices are there. So you have a choice. You can take the self-assessment or you can do that. All right? So I do want to say, though, this isn't a theory for me. This is more than a theory. I'm living my life as a lived laboratory. As they told you in September, I had 25% of my lungs removed. In this coming May, I'm going to Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm running in the Age Group World Championship Marathon in Cape Town, South Africa. Now, I'm going to tell you, I won't win, right? I'm not going to be in first place. I can tell you that from my training right now. But everything we're talking about, I'm using my life as a laboratory in my life, in my leadership, and in the company that we're building. All right, so that was my part. Now let me just ask you, what questions do you have about endurance, about resilience, about those subjects? Yes, here.
I was just going to ask you how endurance compared and contrasted to resilience.
Great question. How much did we pay you to ask that question? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, so resilience is an important concept. What does the resilience mean? Resilience means you get knocked back and you spring forward, right? You get knocked back and you spring forward. And so we started off with the word resilience, saying, yeah, resilience is important. And there are a lot of people who are working on that. I'm not putting that down. What we're saying is, what happens when you get knocked back, 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 right? And there's never time to spring forward, that you're under a constant assault. So that's the question that we're trying to answer here. What else?
This is completely unrelated to your topic.
It's okay.
You found out about I'm a nurse.
Okay.
Retired.
Yeah.
But did you get a call first before that?
Oh no. No, I got cancer by text. You know, come on, right? Yeah, that's poor. That is poor. Yeah. What it is the CT scan came through, and they had that in there. Actually, I went in for a CT scan, cardiac CT scan, and while they were doing that, they go, oh, look, there's pulmonary malignancy in there. Yeah, so it was found by coincidence. And there's a lot of people I've talked to recently who've had similar surgeries that it was a coincidental finding. So as a nurse, you get this. Right. Yeah, please, other questions? Yes.
I have to say, this really resonated with me. 10 years in corporate management.
Yeah.
Having you do this with organizations is awesome, because I found myself leaving the workforce because of a toxic work environment.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, how are you getting buy-in top to bottom with organizations and kind of laying it out in a adoptable manner?
Right. That's a great question. Well, we're new. We're a startup, right? And so we're not very far down this path. I said I'm having 100 coffees. Well, really, those coffees are sort of coffees to pick their brains, but then maybe sell into their organizations. But what we are finding that resonates is the cost of burnout. That organizations understand even though AI can do a lot of things today that they used to use employees for, it's still true that they want key talent in their organizations, and organizations are recognizing there's a cost to that burnout, that as people leave their organization, they now have to bring somebody new in that role, and they have to train them and all that. So that's the key buy-in point, I think. So, and maybe I should be repeating those questions. I'm sorry. Yes.
I was just going to ask because, I know Scott
Yeah.
very well. He talks about resilience, and
Yeah.
I was wondering, one of the things that he says is the people that are the most resilient or scores highest on resilience, whatever,
Yeah.
are people that have had
Mhm.
tough stuff to overcome.
Yeah. Right.
So does that factor in here?
Yes. I don't remember who I was talking to earlier about the kids coming in. Was it you that we were talking about kids coming into the university and that they've been through hard knocks? Over here. Yes. Yeah. And so, there's two things that happen when you get a big blow in your life. It's kind of like a walnut, right? Until you really hit that walnut hard, you can't get to the sweet stuff, right? And so a lot of people, when they go through these kinds of experiences, like all of a sudden, all the things they didn't have access to, it comes forward. I talked to somebody recently who had gone through a terrible incident, and I said, what was that like for you? And she said, do you remember when ketchup used to come in glass bottles? And you were trying to get the last of the ketchup out? What did you do to that ketchup bottle? Boom, right? We can all do it with our hands, right? Boom, boom, boom on the ketchup bottle, right? And she said, that's how it felt. It felt like I took this big jar, but then all the good stuff came out. So I'm not here to do happy. If you have a tragedy in your life, it's all going to be wonderful. No. But I am saying that those things can translate into benefit for you. But yes, people who have been through hard things, they know how to have grit and resilience and come through harder things. Did I see a hand over here? Yes.
Yeah, speaking of calm, can you talk through how you manage stress and what you're doing in your daily life to cope with these things?
Yeah, I mean, there's John Kabat-Zinn. Now, here's our expert over here. I'm sure that Jen could speak to this better than I can. But John Kabat-Zinn did a lot of things back, this is probably 70s and 80s, right, when he first was writing. And so his work still works today. But a lot on breathing exercises, a lot on meditation, a lot on. Right now, I have a mantra: soft heart, warm smile. Soft heart, warm smile. When I'm confronted with something that's really ugly, I say to myself, soft heart, warm smile. If I keep my heart soft, if I don't harden up, if I keep my smile warm, boy, that's just going to put me in the right physical condition. Jen, do you want here? I'm going to hand Jen the microphone for a second. Say your 5 things that you've been talking about too.
I'll say the 5 things that I teach. So in my other life, I'm a individual psychotherapist in my own practice, and so the 5 things that I teach people all the time are eat, sleep, move, community, pleasurable activities. And those are really easy because you have 5 fingers and it's 5 things. And those things that you do every single day as much as possible. And eat sounds kind of, well, silly. And I'm not a dietitian, so but people, when they're really stressed or overwhelmed, they tend to skip meals, or they're eating too much, or they're not eating enough, things like that. So that's why I eat. Sleep. People's sleep gets really screwed up when they're stressed, overwhelmed, depressed, anxious. They're not sleeping enough, or they're sleeping too much. And those are symptoms of depression or anxiety. So paying attention to your sleep. Moving, and I like to say move rather than exercise, because moving can be anything. Moving can be housework. Moving can be gardening. It doesn't matter how you're moving, but moving. And preferably outside. We need to be outside even when it's crummy weather, So moving. Community, whatever that is for you, And even if that's like, I'm going to text a friend a little bit, that's fine. Ideally you're in community with people. You're in community right now. This counts. This more than counts. Most people aren't doing this. So community, and then pleasurable activities, whatever that is for you. If that's reading a book, if that's, riding your bike, if that's knitting. Not enough people are doing those things every day. So that's what I teach people to help endure. And then what Tony was referring to, Jon Kabat-Zinn's stuff, lots of people maybe have heard of like mindfulness activities or doing some meditation. He was the guy that started us all learning about that. And so maybe some of you know about the Center for Spirituality and Healing at the U of M. Well, now it's called the Bakken Center because the Bakken Museum gave a ton of money to that center. And you can take the course there, mindfulness-based stress reduction. That's his work. All of that is his work. And it's just been reformulated over time. That's how we know about meditation and mindfulness stuff, which are really Eastern philosophies. That's how us Western people know about that, because he did all this work for the last 20, 25 years. So, Jon Kabat-Zinn, Z-I-N, yeah. So if you Google his name or, do that. And we have this really cool center where you can learn more about it.
See, I told you she's a smart one. All right, I'll take one more question and then we'll wrap. Yes, over here. Dave.
One of the things I've noticed in my long and troubled career is that there are some managers who have people under them. They're not exactly enduring, because the nasty manager is a hard one to fire. And they have scared the Jesus out of some of the people under them.
Right.
I moved, by the way.
Yeah.
And how do you
deal with the toxic
kind of
manager?
endurance.
Right. Yes.
What do you call that? And is there any?
Right. So I one of the things I was saying, and Dave brings up a really good point. When you have, sometimes what'll happen is you'll have a person who will exhibit a behavior, and there's a reward. And so they'll yell at somebody, and all of a sudden that report comes through that didn't come through before. Or they'll be, a bully boss. They'll start bullying people around. All of a sudden they get results. I'm like, that's pretty cool. So there's this sort of benefit reward kind of thing of this behavior, and then that person becomes habitually toxic, right? So that happens in organizations. It happens with all of us. I got to tell you, if you made a list of everything there is about the best boss you've ever had, and then make a list of everything you ever knew about the worst boss you ever had, I have been both of those people, right? Because sometimes I am my best self, and sometimes I am my worst self. And what we really find is, for many people, you're not failing, you're fatigued. That's why we're working on these things. But that's one of the reasons that we developed this culture and the Enduring Enterprise survey, because what you'll have is you'll have a let's say, for example, a sales manager that is producing the numbers, but they're leaving a wake of bodies, leaving bodies in their wake, right? And so how do you root that out? How do you show that? And that's one of the reasons that we came up with our surveys that have to do with not just the individual behavior, but the organizational behavior and the things that you tolerate, right? Okay. All right, I am going to turn the microphone over. Thank you so much for your attention. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tony. And Jen, thanks for coming in today. If people want to follow up or have more questions, is it cultureshift.com? Is that the best place to go? And we'll put that, I'm sure, in the rib. Karen will, so to get that website out to you. So thanks again, everyone, for coming.